Hey y'all, RANDALL-T here. I struggled with an issue this week with Maschine 2 by Native Instruments that was really my problem, not theirs, but it took me a while to figure out, and I thought I'd make a video on it because it's a little tricky, and maybe just to remind myself how to do it more than anything else, but hopefully somebody out there will save some time by seeing this video. I could not find a video anywhere on it. I could not figure it out in the manual, and finally stumbled across the solution. So here we go. Basically, Maschine is a piece of hardware, and the hardware comes in a bunch of different kinds of models. I bought the least expensive one. That's not the one you're looking at right now, but they all come with the same software package, and it was actually the software package I was most interested in. I wanted to be able to use its sounds. It comes with drum kits and samples and all sorts of great production work that's just ready to go. But one thing it comes with, especially, are things called projects. And let's take a look at what that is. And that's what I was really excited about. So we come over to Maschine. It's loaded into an instrument channel in my ProTools session. Of course, an instrument channel is a MIDI channel and an aux channel grouped together into one channel. We click on that and we open up Maschine. Now, Maschine is really a DAW within a DAW. You can do everything in Maschine. You could build an entire song with everything you need using all of your plugins right inside of this plugin. But that's not the way I work. I want to be able to work in my DAW controlling the sounds that are in Maschine. So let's take a look at some of the things that are in here. Now, if we go to the projects, this is what I'm talking about here. Basically, I have the complete package from the Native Instrument, and it comes with a bunch of things called expansion packs. And these expansion packs each have sample or projects that use the samples, use the drum kits, use the sounds in a way that's very hip and happening, and you can kind of get a feel for what they're doing. And you can then take those and make them into your own songs. And, you know, I want to do that, change them around, of course, and make them my own. So you can come in here, you can click up here, and we can open up, say, Aquarius Earth. And there's several projects within Aquarius Earth that uses the library of sounds that come with Aquarius Earth. So let's take a look at Love Like. If you double click on that, right away we see some patterns and everything. This is the way it works, is you have intro, verse, bridge. Those are all called scenes. In other words, a loop could be thought of, or of a sequence of loops. The patterns are probably more the loops. The scene is a collection of those loops. So you can have an intro and it has 2 patterns, and you have a verse and it has 4 different patterns going on at once. The bridge has 5 different patterns going on at once. Each pattern is an instrument. So like this kick snares here is all of these sounds on here. You can hear them kick. All these sounds right here are all part of that instrument. So when we go ahead and start listening from measure 3, for example, that's where things kind of start happening. It's all tied to the DAW. So I go to measure 3 on my DAW, and there it is. Kind of groovy. So now I want to get all of that MIDI information into my DAW so I can start manipulating it and making it my song, putting things in different places, changing the bass line, maybe changing the kick pattern just a little bit. But I love the sounds. I love the feel. I love, you know, all sorts of things. Of course, the tempo is locked to my DAW, so I could move the tempo wherever I want. It would all work just great. So let's figure out how to do this, and you'll see immediately how I kind of got tripped up on some things. For starters, we're looking at the instrument, right? So, well, we're actually something we need to do very first. We want to go and turn off something. We're going to go to File, Preferences, and then we're going to go down to Default, and then we're going to click on the Focus button for the default MIDI input mode. So this is how it's going to receive MIDI, what it's going to do with it. Right now it's in a mode that is called Focus, which is any instrument that you've clicked on will listen to any and all MIDI. So that's fine if you're kind of just experimenting with things and trying to get a feel for the sounds and everything. For our purposes, we need to turn that off to none because we need to control each instrument very specifically with a very specific MIDI channel and MIDI note. So we turn that off. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the instruments themselves. And this is where I got into trouble when I first started this venture. You have to set each one depending on what it's doing. So kicks and snares are obviously like a little drum kit. And the drum kit wants to be treated by right-clicking and then going to group MIDI batch setup. And we're going to change it from sounds to MIDI channels to sounds to MIDI notes. What this is talking about is when you look down here, you can see there's 3 different instruments playing. I could make it so that each of those instruments, each of those sounds are in the instrument, each of those sounds are going to individual MIDI channels. It's just one sound. I don't need a whole MIDI channel tied up with one sound. So I actually want it to go where each sound is going to a different MIDI note. That's more like the way I think of a drum kit anyways, is the kick is on a certain note, the snare's on a different note, the hi-hat's on a different note, and that's what we want it to do. So we're going to select that for kicks and snare. We're going to do the same thing for hi-hats and percussion. We come to the group thing, we change it to MIDI notes. Now the bass is different. The bass is an instrument, and we actually want it to be the channel has multiple notes playing the same instrument. So that one we leave alone, it just the way it is. We're going to change the next one to MIDI notes as well, and next one MIDI notes as well. So that's where I kind of got tripped up last time, and I'll show you one other place I got tripped up that was just crazy. Okay, so now we have those all set. The next thing we need to do is say, okay, fine. That's how it is going to think of itself as it exports the MIDI to my DAW. It's going to do MIDI notes for each of the drum kits and each of the sample kits. I should point that out. It's like the samples are basically like a drum kit, right? So it's like each note is being done. That's just one sample, and then there's another sample there. There's a reverse version of it. So when you play them, you go, and then you can fire off things the way you want to. So that's still a sample trigger, just like a drum trigger. So you treat that as like we have it set, which is where you do the sounds to MIDI notes. Okay. Now, the next thing is, how are we going to receive MIDI? And each of these also have a different setting that needs to happen. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the library so we have a little more room to work here. So each of these have a setting as well for how it receives the MIDI. So we go here when it is the MIDI to to MIDI notes to channel type instrument. We're going to set the group to a setting, and we're going to say, okay, the input for the MIDI, we're going to set that to manual. We're going to set that to host, which is ProTools. And we're going to say MIDI channel 1. I want it to listen to MIDI channel 1. We'll just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right on down the list. So we'll do the next one, do the same thing. Input for the MIDI on the group, we're going to set that to manual, host, and then channel 2 this time instead of 1. The bass, we're going to do a little differently. We want the actual sound to have the MIDI channel instead of the whole group. So we're going to change it to sound, and we're going to say, let's make this the host again. And then we're going to say this one's going to be channel 3. It's the third one down. Now you'll notice that there's 2 sounds here. And if we wanted both of them to be used, which we don't in this case, but you could, one you could set to 3, the next one you could set to 4. That would be fine. Then as we get done with the we'll do the other ones real quick. So this goes back to group because it's basically a sample kit. We set that to manual, host 4. And then we're going to set this one to the group, input to manual, host 5. So we have that done. That's great. And now we're ready to start making some transfers of MIDI into my DAW. And we need to set up, we're going to have basically 5 channels set up, 5 instrument channels correlating to these 5 instruments. So we could go and name those: kick and snares, hats and percussion, bass, samples, and that would be a good idea. You do that over here in the DAW. And I already have some tracks set up. I do this in part of my template. I always leave tracks ready and rolling in my template, and I just come and activate them, and I leave them deactivated so it loads faster. But I'm all set now. You got to go in and say each one of these has to be set to a different MIDI channel at the top. And they were already set because that's the way my template is. But basically, you go channel 1, and then you go to the second one, channel 2, go to the third one, channel 3, so on. Okay. So that's going to make it so that now it's controlling those instruments in Maschine. And what we do now, we're going to actually load the data into those different tracks. So we're going to go ahead and move over to the edit window. And here's those 5 tracks still we're looking at, and we're going to be working on the first one first. So what we do is we're at measure 3. Kind of see that behind the blue arrow there. We're at measure 3, and we're going to start measure 3 here. We're going to click on the first pattern, and the way we get it over there is we come over to this little tool right here, this little MIDI tool, and I'm going to click that and drag it over, and it brings the MIDI over. If I click here, actually, there's a waveform, and it will render a waveform of that same information too. And that's, a lot of people like working with waveforms more than MIDI. I'm a MIDI guy, so give me the MIDI, please, please. So here's the MIDI. I'm going to click it, drag it, and all I do is I come over into that track and I drop it on, and there it is. And then I do the same for the next one. Now, this is where it gets a little slow. As you can tell, it's like, well, you're only working on one pattern at a time, Randy. It's like, Randall, it's like, yes, I am. And that's not cool at all. And I'm hoping, Native Instruments kind of figures out that it would be much cooler if I could do something where I could select all the patterns for a given instrument and export them at one time. That would be the best. Now, if you notice, I just clicked and did the same thing with the bass. Look at all the mess it's bringing over with this. And this is one of the things I had a problem with. It's like, I didn't know what was going on here. It's bringing way more stuff than I want. And that's not what I want. It's doing one track long and a bunch of short tracks. Well, the reason it's doing that is because it's in this little mode here. If you switch it to the MIDI mode where you can actually see the MIDI notes displayed, now it will work correctly. So you'd make that change, click the little keyboard, now go grab the MIDI, and you'll see that it's just a single thing, and that's the bass part there. We do the same for this part, and we bring it over and we kick it into part number 4. Now, here's the other tricky part I couldn't figure out at first, is the patterns that are here are going to keep playing, and you can't get rid of them, or you can't mute them, or you can't make them not work. There's no, when I right click them and say there's no mute or anything, which would have been really nice. So there's nothing I can really do there. So what I actually have to do is I have to come in and say delete. So I'm going to delete that pattern, and don't worry, it's still stored in that original one. You're not losing anything, but you're going to delete it. I'm going to leave this last one in so it doesn't shrink the 4 bars down to 1 bar. So it's going to still have 4 bars. So now if we do that and we start at measure 3 again, we should hear stuff, and let's see what happens. Measure 3. And there it is. Now it's playing the original patterns again, because all we imported was just those 4 bars you can see right there. So we've imported it in. I could mute these. I could mute the MIDI channels right here. Mute. And I could play that same bit a bit. Oh, I must not have deleted the Oh, I didn't delete this pattern. Oh, let's do this. Let's go ahead and add a pattern here. So that keeps that, and then I can get rid of that. So it was still playing the original pattern. That's what's happening. So now we listen to it. There's nothing, because I muted all the MIDI channels. And then when measure 7 comes along, it's going to start playing the patterns again. Okay. But we turn the MIDIs back on. So now you can I'm just proving basically that, yes, I am controlling Maschine. So now I'm controlling it again. Okay. So that's the first tricky part that we had to figure out, and that works now. So now I'm controlling, I can actually record, enable anything, and I can control it just the way I want. I can play the bass part however I want. And I can do all sorts of fun stuff there and change MIDI notes, change the parts around. And I'm now having fun. But the next piece is you kind of want a little more control of the sounds. They're all coming, if you notice, if we go back to our mixer mode, when I'm playing, it's all coming in on that first channel. It's doing the mix that was, it's the same mix that came out of Maschine and originally, and that's fine, but I may want a little more control than that. So the way we do that is we come in to Maschine and we turn on the mixer mode. That's this little icon right here. We click here, and basically here are the instruments. So here's the first instrument, the second instrument, the third instrument, the fourth and fifth instrument. So basically here I have the kick snare thing, and you can see basically what each instrument has for effects processing. So on the snare, that's the sample there, you can see it, and then there's a little bit of reverb on the snare. And on the kick, there's a little bit of a filter, probably notching off a little bit at the top end. Oh, it's actually got an LFO filter, so it's kind of moving the kick around a little bit. Nothing on here. And then it all comes out the same group. So it's all coming out of here, and it's actually going to get to an effect that's in the master area. And we get to that by clicking here, double clicking here. So everything on the kicks and snares is going through a transient master here before it gets to the final output. This one has nothing. The bass has a distortion and a little bit of transient master as well. So each one has all these different effects. It's just a different way of thinking about it and how they route and whatnot. Double click here again. We're back to here. Now I could say I want that kick to go out all by itself, but I don't really want to do that. I want to actually have the entire instrument go out, the external one, instead of and then separate each instrument out. That's enough for me right now, and I think I can get by with that. So we double click into here again. Whoops, double click here. And here's where that setting is. So right now it's going out master, which is essentially that external one, but we're going to be explicit about it. Say external one here. And then on this one, we're going to say external 2. I don't think I have to click it. I think I can just go through external 3, external 4, external 5. Then, so those are now leaving Maschine on each of those outputs. So now I come over to the mixer over here, and I'm going to actually use external 2, 3, 4, 5. And they're actually already set up that way, but if they weren't, I would just, again, come in Maschine 2, 3, 4, 5, and they would be set up and ready to use. So now we should see, starting at measure 3, we should see audio coming out of all those channels. And there they are. So if you wanted to hear something by itself, you could solo. Here's the bass. Okay, so now I have some separation that's basically subgroups of the things I need to have subbed, and that's fine. That's a lot better than where I was going before. It still has some of the cool effects that they put onto it that made it sound great, so I don't have to mess with that. I can mess with it all I want. If, I could certainly come in and change something about the kick if I wanted to, or I could change something about the bass if I wanted to, compress it a little bit more, put more saturation on it, whatever. So there's lots of stuff you can do within there, but now I've got control. And that's what I was going after, and I was having such a hard time getting to. So hopefully that helps as you're looking at using Maschine. I think it's a great product, and some of these sounds are just fun. I love taking them and then being able to rebuild them into songs that I'm using, but they still have great sounds, still have great grooves, and I think it's a great way to put songs together. So have a great time with that. Go out and make some magic.